Welcome to the Supreme Court Podcast.
All opinions expressed in this podcast do not reflect the views of the Supreme Court. For clarity, the text of the decision prevails.
Rosanna and Mario were married on December 16, 1995. However, after 4 years of marriage, they separated in the year 2000. Rosanna was later awarded sole custody of their daughter. During their marriage, Rosanna alleged that Mario repeatedly failed to perform his duties as a husband and father. She described a pattern of chronic irresponsibility, substance abuse, and emotional immaturity, behavior which she claimed showed his inability to fulfill the basic obligations of marriage. Rosanna then filed a petition for the declaration of nullity of her marriage before the trial court on the ground of psychological incapacity. The trial court ruled in her favor and declared the marriage void. However, the Court of Appeals later reversed the ruling, questioning the reliability of the psychiatric evaluation and upheld the validity of the marriage. When the case reached the Supreme Court, the court not only granted Rosanna's petition and reversed the decision of the Court of Appeals, it also took the opportunity to revisit the doctrine of psychological incapacity, particularly the strict guidelines set in Republic v. Court of Appeals and Molina, which had often been applied rigidly to deny many petitions under Article 36 of the Family Code. The court clarified that psychological incapacity is fundamentally a legal and not purely a medical concept. The court said that it refers to a spouse's enduring inability to fulfill essential marital obligations due to deeply rooted psychological causes. It also emphasized that a medical diagnosis or expert testimony is not always required. Within the legal community, the case is known as Tanandal versus Tan, widely regarded as one of the Philippine Supreme Court's landmark rulings in recent judicial history. How has the Supreme Court's interpretation of psychological incapacity evolved over time? And what does this evolution reveal about the court's continuing effort to balance the protection of marriage with the realities of marital breakdown? Hi, I'm Attorney Mike Navalio, Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. It's the 13th of March 2026, and today we talk about the evolution of the Philippine Supreme Court's interpretation of psychological incapacity within the context of the case of Rosanna L. Tanandal versus Mario Victor Emandal, GR number 196359. This decision was penned by Senior Associate Justice Marvic MVF Leonen and decided by the Supreme Court en banc on May 11, 2021. And with us to discuss this case is Dean Maria Soledad de Requito Mawis, member of the Philippine Judicial Academy Department of Civil Law and Dean of the College of Law Lyceum of the Philippines University. Hi, Dean Sol. Welcome back to the Supreme Court PH podcast.
Again, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Dean, and last week actually we discussed the difference between annulment and declaration of nullity of marriage and their effect on the legitimacy of the children. And briefly, we touched on psychological incapacity. And so this is about a natural continuation of that discussion. We focus now on Article 36 of the Family Code and how psychological incapacity operates as a ground for declaring a marriage void. So briefly, Dean, let's talk about Article 36 of the Family Code. What does it say about psychological incapacity?
Okay, Article 36 as written states that a marriage contracted by any party who at the time of the celebration of the marriage was psychologically incapacitated to comply with his obligations of marriage shall likewise be void even if such incapacity becomes manifest only after its solemnization. Now, talking about its origins or history, Article 36 finds its roots actually from Canon 1095 of the Canon Law. And Canon 1095 provides that the following are incapable of contracting marriage. The first ground is one who lacks sufficient use of reason. The second one is who suffer from a grave defect of discretion of judgment concerning essential matrimonial rights and duties to be given and accepted mutually. And the third actually is the basis for our Article 36, who for causes of psychological nature are unable to assume the essential obligations of marriage. So accordingly, although not decisive, but just perhaps persuasive, the jurisprudence under canon law prevailing at the time of the code's enactment nevertheless cannot be dismissed as impertinent for its value as an aid, at least to the interpretation or construction of Article 36 of the Family Code.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dean, prior to the current case that we're discussing, the 2021 Tanandal case, what were the prevailing standards for psychological incapacity? Because if you look at Article 36, there's really no definition of psychological incapacity, and this was laid down in the cases that were decided later on.
You are very correct that prior to the May 2021 Tanandal case, the Supreme Court's requirements actually were based on two cases. First is the Santos versus Court of Appeals case and the Republic versus Court of Appeals in Manila case. The Family Code Committee did not give any examples of psychological incapacity for fear that the giving of examples would limit the applicability of the provision under the principle of ejusdem generis. Now, in Santos versus CA, citing canon law principle, psychological incapacity then was deemed to consist of a true inability to commit oneself to the essentials of marriage. Second, this inability to commit oneself must refer to the essential obligations of marriage, the conjugal act, the community life of love and life, the rendering of mutual help, the procreation and education of offspring. And third, the inability must be tantamount to a psychological abnormality. Now, psychological incapacity, as defined by the Santos case, should refer to no less than a mental, not physical incapacity that causes a party to be truly incognitive of the basic marital covenants that concomitantly must be assumed and discharged by the parties to the marriage. Now, in the case of Molina versus Republic, this is where the Supreme Court laid down the guidelines in the interpretation and application of Article 36 for the guidance of the bench and the bar. Basically, these guidelines are as follows. First, the burden of proof will always be with the petitioner. Any doubt should be resolved in favor of the existence and the continuation and, of course, the validity of the marriage. The second one is you have to prove the root cause of the psychological incapacity, which, according to the Supreme Court in the case of Molina, must be medically or clinically identified. It must be alleged in the complaint. It must be sufficiently proven by experts and clearly explained in the decision. And then the third is that said incapacity must be proven to be existing at the time of the celebration of the marriage. And when is that? When you exchange I-do's. The fourth is such incapacity must also be shown to be medically or clinically permanent or incurable. Such incurability may be absolute or even relative only in regard to the other spouse, not necessarily absolutely against everyone of the same sex. The fifth is such illness must be grave enough to bring about the disability of the party to assume essential obligations of marriage. So mild characterological peculiarities, mood changes, occasional emotional outbursts cannot be accepted as root cause. And then the sixth guideline is that the essential marital obligations must be those embraced by Article 68 up to 71 of the Family Code as regards the husband and the wife, as well as Articles 220, 221, 225 of the same code in regard to parents and their children. And then finally, there are 8. Number 7, interpretations given by the National Appellate Matrimonial Tribunal of the Catholic Church in the Philippines, while not controlling or decisive, should be given great respect by our courts because precisely Article 36 was based on canon law. And then the last one is that the trial court must order the prosecuting attorney or fiscal or public prosecutor and the Solicitor General to appear as counsel for the state. So in petitions for nullity and annulment, there are actually 3 parties. The petitioner, the respondent, and the state as represented by the OSG. Now, the Supreme Court now, in the case of Tan Andal, change the guidelines. I would like to say change the guidelines because now it's different. Particularly, with respect to the first Molina Doctrine. Remember the first Molina Doctrine that says the burden of proof to show the nullity of the marriage belongs to the plaintiff. It has been modified to a certain extent. the plaintiff's spouse, according to the case of Andaltan, must prove still his or her case with clear and convincing evidence. Unlike before, it was based on, because it's the civil case, it is preponderance of evidence. Now, the quantum of evidence, according to Andaltan, is it should be clear and convincing evidence. And this is a quantum of proof that requires more than preponderant evidence, but less than proof beyond reasonable doubt. And what is the reason behind the shift or the change to as regards a quantum of evidence? It's because it follows the presumption of validity of marriages. As with any presumption, such as the presumption of regularity in the issuance of public documents, regularity in the performance of duty, good faith, or of sufficient consideration, it can only be rebutted with clear and convincing evidence.
Given those standards, the Supreme Court actually said in Tanandal that the standards set in Santos versus CA and Republic versus Court of Appeals and Molina were restrictive, rigid, and intrusive on our rights to liberty, autonomy, and human dignity. What's the reasoning behind this?
In the said case, Tanandal, in fact, the Supreme Court remarked that because of the restrictive interpretation resulting from the application of the Molina guidelines, the court pronounced in an earlier case, and that is Tev versus Te, that jurisprudential doctrine has unnecessarily imposed a perspective by which psychological incapacity should be viewed, a view that is totally inconsistent with the way the concept was formulated. Again, in the case of Te, the Supreme Court said that the Molina guidelines worked like a straitjacket in which psychological incapacity cases are forced to fit. So far from what was intended by the court, Molina has become a straitjacket forcing all sizes to fit and be bound by it. Wittingly or unwittingly, the Supreme Court said it conveniently just applied Molina, and it has allowed diagnosed sociopaths, schizophrenics, nymphomaniacs, narcissists, and the like to continuously debase and pervert the sanctity of marriage. And because of that, the Supreme Court said that the Molina guidelines should be revisited such that its application violates the right to liberty, personal autonomy, and human dignity of Filipinos, as it imposes a burden that unreasonably interferes with individual choices of intimate arrangements. It condemns those who may have made very human errors in choosing those with whom they should be intimate to a life of pain and suffering. So the courts must enforce this cruelty is the very antithesis of the freedoms embodied in the many provisions of our Constitution.
Which exactly among the standards laid down in Molina, Dean, were deemed to be restrictive and rigid and therefore had to be abandoned by the Tanandal ruling?
Okay. Actually, the guideline that was specifically and expressly abandoned by the case is the second Molina doctrine. In the Supreme Court case of Tanandal, it reiterated the ruling in Marcos versus Marcos, wherein it said that medical examination of the person concerned need not be resorted to. So instead, as this court said, that the totality of evidence presented is enough to sustain a finding of psychological incapacity. Now, in the case of Tanandal, the Supreme Court now categorically abandons the second Molina doctrine. Psychological incapacity is neither a mental incapacity nor a personality disorder that must be proven through expert opinion. However, and the Supreme Court was quick to add, there must be proof of, number one, the durable or enduring aspects of a person's personality called personality structure. Second, the personality structure manifests itself through clear acts of dysfunctionality that undermines the family, and the spouse's personality structure must make it impossible for him or her to understand and, more importantly, to comply with his or her essential marital obligations. Therefore, proof of these aspects of personality need not be given by an expert. So who will be your witnesses if you don't want to get an expert? Ordinary witnesses who have been present in the life of the spouses before the latter contracted marriage may testify on behaviors that they have consistently observed from the supposedly incapacitated spouse.
So it's not judge now who will determine if a person is psychologically incapacitated
Yes.
in the absence of an expert testimony.
Yes, it's going to be the totality of evidence
Evidence.
that will guide the judge to determine whether this person is psychologically incapacitated or not. So what is very important is that you have to correlate the behavior, of the spouse with his past. The present is actually defined by his past. That is very important because you have to prove that at the time you exchanged I do's, the psychological incapacity is already present at that point in time.
So juridical antecedents is still a key requirement.
Yeah, it's still a requirement. Yes.
But in practical terms, Dean, how likely is it for someone trying to have the marriage declared void to not get an expert witness, like a medical expert, to prove psychological incapacity? Because it's quite risky. For example, if you are the lawyer and you would rely on testimonies of people who are close to the spouses, and for the judge to conclude that there was actually juridical antecedents at this point.
As a practitioner,
Yes.
I would always get an expert witness because I am not sure whether the evidence I have will be sufficient to establish juridical antecedents. So I might as well get an expert witness. In fact, in the case of Tan Andal, there was an expert witness whose testimony and report were actually referred in the said case and was used as basis to justify the declaration of nullity.
But theoretically, because you don't need a medical expert, does this mean lesser expenses for people
Yes.
trying to have their marriage declared void?
Yes. And the nice thing about the case of Tan Andal, Supreme Court gave an example of, you not needing an expert witness. Example, proof of juridically antecedent psychological incapacity may consist of testimonies describing the environment where the supposedly incapacitated spouse lived that may have led to a particular behavior. Example, according to the Supreme Court, violence against one's spouse and children can be a manifestation of a juridically antecedent psychological incapacity when it is shown that the violent spouse grew up with domestic violence or had a history of abusive romantic relationships before the marriage. The other example is child abuse. Trauma research shows that our past, if not properly healed, heavily affects our present. As such, evidence of the juridically antecedent psychological incapacity may consist of testimony on the spouse's past experiences that may have led him or her to become a child abuser.
So you really need to make that connection.
Yes.
Are there other doctrines under the Molina ruling, Dean, that although not explicitly declared as abandoned by the Tan Andal ruling, but have been modified as a result of the Tan Andal ruling?
Yes. And I'm referring to the fourth Molina doctrine. Not being an illness in a medical sense, psychological incapacity is not something to be cured. And even if it were a mental disorder, it cannot be described in terms of being curable or incurable. Therefore, the Supreme Court held that psychological incapacity contemplated in Article 36 of the Family Code is incurable not in the medical sense, but in the legal sense. So the third Molina guideline was amended accordingly. And the incapacity must be enduring and persistent with respect to a specific partner. It contemplates a situation where the couple's respective personality structures are so incompatible and antagonistic that the only result of the union would be the inevitable and irreparable breakdown of the marriage. And there is this undeniable pattern of such persisting failure to be present, loving, faithful, respectful, and supportive spouse. And it must be established so as to demonstrate that there is indeed a psychological anomaly or incongruity in the spouse relative to the other.
This particular aspect, Dean, I want to zero in because we often hear people say it's quite convenient that you're psychologically incapacitated to one person, but you're not to another person. So how do you explain that?
Well, based on experience, some persons bring out the worst in you, but some persons bring out the best in you. So really, it's a matter, I think, of you in relation to this specific person. It does not necessarily follow that if you are quote unquote bad against this person, you're bad against all the persons in the entire universe. No, so it's really very relative. It's partner basis only.
So it's really a matter of finding the right match.
Oh yes,
For
yes.
marriage. Any other doctrines, Dean,
Oh, yes.
that were changed?
The other doctrine that was changed, okay, in the case of Tan Andal, the Supreme Court said that the quantum of evidence required for you to be able to get a declaration of nullity is clear and convincing evidence, no longer preponderance of evidence. So that's higher than clear and convincing evidence is higher than preponderance of evidence. Sometimes this is just my opinion. I think because of the higher quantum of evidence, it's more difficult to prove it. Because it's a quantum of evidence higher than the usual preponderance of evidence.
So it's not just weighing of two sides.
Yeah, which is the heavier one.
Yes.
It really has to be clear and convincing because of the many disputable presumptions favoring marriage. And that is the reason why it has to be clear and convincing evidence.
So how do you now overcome the presumption of a valid marriage under the Tan Andal ruling?
Okay, you really have to show, number one, that there is a correlation of the present with the past. You have to establish a dysfunctional personality structure. You cannot just focus on the now. Because if the now is your only basis, then you might be proving only grounds for legal separation
Right.
and not psychological incapacity.
And maybe in later cases, we will be able to discuss this. We've also seen some grounds under legal separation which were actually considered as evidence of psychological incapacity.
But in those cases, they were able to correlate that the present acts or dysfunctional acts are just but manifestations of a juridical antecedents. Because you have to prove that it is the dysfunctional behavior should be proven to be enduring, pervasive, and continuous. Now, the other change that was introduced by the Tan Andal case is, a review of the deliberations of the Code Committee reveals that lack of due discretion under the second paragraph of Canon 1095, is actually part of the concept of psychological incapacity as envisioned by the Code Committee. Why is this very important? Because in several cases, in the Malilim versus Hamesolamin case and in the Nahera versus Nahera case, the Supreme Court said since the canon law nullified the marriage based on the second paragraph, it cannot be used as evidence to show that there is psychological incapacity because Article 36 was based on the third paragraph of canon law. Now, with the case of Tan Andal, Supreme Court said that lack of discretion, which is the second paragraph of Canon 1095, is actually part of the concept of psychological incapacity. So while Article 36 of the Family Code is similarly worded to the third paragraph of Canon 1095, canonical decisions based on the second paragraph, those who suffer from a grave defect of discretion of judgment, should likewise have a persuasive effect in secular decisions on psychological incapacity if we are to avoid anomalous situations where canonically void marriages remain valid under civil law. But to repeat, canonical decisions are merely persuasive and not binding on secular courts.
Does this mean it would be easier to get a canonical ruling first before going to court if it's going to be persuasive on the court?
I always say this: one is not precondition of the other. But getting a canonical nullity, you can use it as evidence in your civil case, and that will really help.
In terms of the timeline, though, won't it delay
yes.
the whole proceeding?
Yes, it will.
How long does it take to get a canonical
I know
ruling?
it's long. It's really it entails a longer period of time.
All right. And so it's been 5 years since the Tanandal ruling. This was promulgated in 2021, and there have been several cases already following that ruling in Tanandal. And maybe it would be helpful to our listeners, Dean, to discuss some of the recent jurisprudence, because we mentioned that there were cases before where abandonment was not considered a sign or an evidence of psychological incapacity. But recently, in De La Cruz Lanuza versus Lanuza, that was decided in April 17, 2024, there was a declaration from the court that prolonged absence, running to decades, unjustified absence at that, from the marital home, including not providing support, refusal to act as a parent or spouse, is sufficient evidence of psychological incapacity. How do we explain this? Does that mean if you abandon your family for a long time, that can be considered psychological incapacity?
Okay. I will have to clarify the statement that abandonment is indicative of psychological incapacity. In the case you mentioned in Lanuza versus Lanuza, abandonment alone is not a ground
Right.
for one to be considered psychologically incapacitated. Based on the said decision, there were other pieces of evidence that were considered by the court. One being the psychiatric history on collateral information or information from sources outside from the person evaluated. Now, in this case, an expert witness was presented who was able to explain how respondent's personality disorder developed from his childhood and how it is correlated to his inability to fulfill his obligations as a husband and a father. So the gravity of respondent's personality disorder was shown by his lack of recognition that his responsibilities to his wife and children. His personality disorder appears to have been fostered by how he was raised by his family, as he was deprived of appropriate parental supervision and guidance, and his parents' lenient and tolerable attitude encouraged him to be extremely assertive. And this shows the importance of proving juridical antecedents.
And to prove juridical antecedents, you did mention that you can get people who are close to the spouse,
Yes.
and not necessarily just the spouse themselves.
Yes. You have to get people, ideally, who knew of the spouse even before they got married, during the formative years, who were able to witness, the consistency in the person's behavior and attitude. That's very important. In fact, the Supreme Court in the case of Lanuza said the psychological incapacity must have been developed during his formative years and existed prior to his marriage to the other spouse. Then you can show the incurability of respondent's personality disorder, which was actually explained by the expert witness in the case of Lanuza.
So, Dean, the next question would be, who can bring the petition to have the marriage voided on the ground of psychological incapacity? Can I say, I'm the one claiming to be psychologically incapacitated, can I bring that petition before the court? Or does the doctrine of unclean hands apply here?
Well, according to the case of Clavicilia versus Clavicilia, anybody can file the petition, even the person who was found to be psychologically incapacitated. Therefore, the doctrine of unclean hands is not applicable in petitions for declaration of nullity, which means that even the person who was found to be psychologically incapacitated can be the petitioner. And what is the basis? The basis of that will be Section 2 of AM number 02-11-10 that states who may file a petition. A petition for declaration of absolute nullity of void marriage may be filed solely by the husband or the wife without any qualification. So the doctrine of unclean hand does not apply. In fact, when you say I do you know that you're psychologically incapacitated? You wouldn't know. It will be years after, maybe a year or 2 years after, then that's the only time you'll be able to more or less feel that your husband or your spouse is psychologically incapacitated, because there are now overt manifestations of a disordered personality.
So, Dean, just to close our discussion on Tan Andal, how does that ruling or that decision balance the presumption of a valid marriage with the protection of individual rights?
There's one statement in Tan Andal that really piqued my interest. And that statement says that the state's interest should not amount to unwarranted intrusions into individual liberties. And why? Because in an earlier case, Santos Gantan versus Gantan, the Supreme Court said that in dissolving marital bonds on ground of psychological incapacity of either spouse, the court is not demolishing the foundation of families by preventing a person who is afflicted with psychological disorder and incapable of complying with the essential marital obligations from remaining in that sacred bond. The court is actually protecting the sanctity of marriage. In the first place, there is no marriage to speak of since it is void from the very beginning. So in the case of Te versus Te, the Supreme Court enunciated that the declaration of nullity of marriage under Article 36 will merely provide a decent burial to a stillborn marriage. So it really doesn't mean that, if you were declared psychologically incapacitated or your marriage was nullified because of Article 36, the Supreme Court is no longer upholding the sanctity of marriage. I do agree with the Supreme Court that the declaration of nullity of marriage under Article 36 will merely provide a decent burial to a stillborn marriage because there was no marriage to speak of to begin with.
And then finally, our takeaway from this discussion, any parting words to our listeners?
It's more difficult to undo what has been done. So before plunging to marriage, think not only once, twice, thrice. Because not all marriages are made in heaven. And you don't want to be perpetually in hell. So think twice, thrice, 4 times.
Very well said. And I will take that to heart, Dean. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
And if you wish to read the full text of the court's decision, please visit the Supreme Court website and e-library and search for the case of Rosana L. Tan Andal versus Mario Victor M. Andal, GR number 196359. Here's Tiff Atendido Beltran, Supreme Court Information Officer, for this week's updates.
From the Supreme Court of the Philippines, here's the latest. The Supreme Court en banc has upheld the validity of a Department of Justice or DOJ circular that raised the standard of proof in preliminary investigations and inquest proceedings, from probable cause to prima facie evidence with reasonable certainty of conviction. In a decision written by Associate Justice Japar de Maampao, the court ruled that Department Circular No. 15, Series of 2024, containing the 2024 DOJ National Prosecution Service rules on preliminary investigation and inquest proceedings, is a valid exercise of the DOJ's authority over prosecutorial processes. Under the new rules, prosecutors must ensure that evidence to charge a person with a crime must sufficiently establish all the elements and warrant a conviction. The SC dismissed a petition claiming that the DOJ encroached on SC's rulemaking authority. Instead, it reiterated its ruling in AM number 24-02-09-SC, recognizing preliminary investigation as an executive and not a judicial function. In another case, the SC has upheld the 2 million peso fine imposed on Abacus Coal Exploration and Development Corporation for failing to fully disclose in its audited financial statements the true value of its assets and additional capital. In a decision written by Associate Justice Maria Filomena Singh, the SC's Third Division denied Abacus Coal's petition, questioning the ruling of the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC. The court held that Abacus Coal violated Rule 68 of the Securities Regulation Code, which requires corporations to include in their balance sheets all intangible assets, capital, and reserves. Not disclosing these items results in material deficiencies and misstatements, which are subject to fines under SEC Memorandum Circular No. 08-09. Meanwhile, Associate Justice Maria Filomena Singh highlighted women's contributions and gender parity in the Philippine judiciary this week at the 70th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in New York, United States. As president-elect of the International Association of Women Judges, or IAWJ, she served as keynote speaker at the IAWJ International Day of Women Judges networking reception held on Tuesday. Also on March 10, Justice Singh met with the Kazakhstan delegation and the National Association of Women Judges. She is also expected to speak at side events on ensuring victim-centered access to justice and 2 panels on access to justice for women and girls on March 16, 2026. Finally, on Monday, Chief Justice Alexander Hismundo administered the oath of office to the Board of Trustees and Officers for 2026 to 2028 of the Philippine Association of Law Schools, or PALS, at the SC On-Bank Session Hall in Manila. PALS is a national organization that represents law schools across the country, led by its chairperson, University of San Jose Recoleto School of Law Dean Jonathan Capanas, and its president, Philippine Law School Dean Jose Grapilon. Also present during the oath-taking ceremony was Associate Justice Ricardo Rosario. You are now up to date with the Philippine Supreme Court. I am Tiffat Indy Beltran, Supreme Court Information Officer.
And that's our podcast this week. Join us again next time for a detailed discussion of select cases decided by the Supreme Court. I'm Attorney Mike Navalio, your Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. You can catch this podcast as well as previous episodes on the Supreme Court Public Information Office's accounts on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. This podcast episode was produced by the Supreme Court Public Information Office, with Attorney Mike Navalio as overall in charge of production, Attorney Karen Martinez as supervising producer, Jay Rempilio, executive producer, Tiff Atendido Beltran, producer, May Sibal, Attorney Ian Aldueso, Attorney Sheila Reyes, and Ramir Simbahon as researchers and writers, Brian Austria, Don Ryan Balza, and Vinny Larario as audio editors, Lawrence Olaño and Austin Aliscad as video editors, Bea Batong as graphic artist, and Tyke Flores and Jerome Batumalake as web editors.